I watched through the kitchen door as my son Tommy scraped leftover food from his cousin's plates, his small hands red from the hot water. Around the dining table, my late husband's family continued their weekly Sunday dinner as if they didn't notice the child laboring in the kitchen. Faster, boy, my mother-in-law, Patricia, barked from her seat at the head of the table. Your cousins want their dessert plates, and heaven knows you need the practice for your future career. Tommy's cousins, Blake and Madison, smirked as they deliberately dropped their spoons on the floor, creating more work for him. At 13 and 12, they'd already mastered their grandmother's cruel streak. He's doing the best he can, I said quietly, stepping into the dining room. He hasn't even had his own dinner yet. Patricia's perfectly lined lips curled into a sneer. Well, Rachel, perhaps if you'd managed to hold onto my son instead of driving him to work himself to death, Tommy wouldn't need to learn valuable life skills. The accusation hit like a physical blow. James's death 6 months ago in a car accident had left wounds that were still raw. But Patricia's version of events, that my common background had somehow pushed into work excessive hours, was a special kind of cruel. If only she knew the truth about those long hours, about the empire James had built, the restaurants he'd acquired, including her precious Le Mason, the 5-star establishment she bragged about having family connections to. Speaking of valuable skills, my sister-in-law Margaret chimed in, watching Tommy struggle with a particularly stubborn pot. Have you found work yet, Rachel? Now that James's modest insurance has surely run out. I thought about the documents in my bag, the ones James's lawyers had finally finished processing, about the trust fund that would ensure Tommy's future, and the ownership papers to every restaurant in the family chain, including the one we were sitting in. I'm managing, I replied simply, watching Patricia's jaw clench at my lack of desperation. Well, Patricia announced loudly, I suppose we could find Tommy some regular work here in the kitchen. Start him young, since he clearly won't be following the family's academic tradition. Tommy's shoulders hunched as he scrubbed harder, trying to hide his tears. They didn't know about his perfect grades, his gifted program acceptance, or the junior chef competition he'd won last month. Patricia had refused to attend any school events since James's death, claiming they were beneath her station. Actually, I started, but was cut off by the arrival of Patricia's prize chef, Marcel. Madame Patricia. He bowed slightly. The special dessert you requested. Yes, yes, she waved him away. Just make sure the boy cleans everything properly. Can't have him thinking he deserves special treatment just because of circumstances. By circumstances, she meant James's death, as if losing his father was some sort of calculated inconvenience to her social standing. Tommy, Marcel called kindly, come help me plate the desserts. At least someone in this restaurant showed my son kindness. Marcel had been teaching Tommy basic cooking techniques during these forced kitchen sessions, turning punishment into secret lessons. He needs to finish the dishes first, Patricia snapped. Standards must be maintained. Blake deliberately knocked over his water glass, smirking as it shattered on the expensive tiles. Oops. Better clean that up too, cousin. I watched my son move to clean the broken glass, his small hands trembling, and something inside me snapped. Tommy, I said clearly, put down the broom. Now. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Rachel, you forget your place. In this restaurant, I cut in, finally pulling the documents from my bag. My son is not the help. In fact, as of this morning, he's your employer. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. Even Marcel, who'd been heading back to the kitchen, froze mid-step. What nonsense are you spouting? Margaret demanded, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. I spread the papers on the table, right next to Patricia's crystal wine glass. James's final gift to his son. Full ownership of the entire restaurant group, including this establishment, to be held in trust until Tommy's 21st birthday, with me as executor. Patricia's face went from porcelain white to mottled red. Impossible. James would never. Would never what? I asked quietly. Leave his empire to his only child? The one you've been treating like a servant? Did you really think all those late nights were just about running your precious La Maison? Tommy stood in the middle of the broken glass, water soaking his shoes, as his grandmother's perfectly constructed world began to crumble. Marcel, I called, not taking my eyes off Patricia. Please bring my son's dinner. At the table. On our best china. Patricia's hands shook as she reached for the legal documents, her expensive rings catching the light. Her eyes darted across the papers, growing wider with each paragraph. This is, she sputtered. Complete and legally binding, I finished. Every restaurant in the group. Every property. Every contract. All in Tommy's name with me as executor until he's of age. Marcel, bless him, was already setting a place at the main table for Tommy, using the special china Patricia reserved for important guests, the same china she forbidden Tommy to touch, claiming his common hands might break it. But what about us? Blake whined, watching his cousin being seated at the table. Mom, we're supposed to inherit the family business. Margaret's face had taken on a calculating look. Surely we can come to some arrangement, Rachel. After all, the children need their inheritance. Like Tommy needed dinner? I asked coldly. Or did you mean the inheritance you promised your kids while making mine wash dishes? Tommy sat stiffly in his chair, clearly uncertain about this sudden change in status. Years of being treated as less than family had left their mark. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, touching his shoulder. Eat your dinner. You don't have to wait for anyone's permission anymore. Patricia found her voice at last. This will ruin us. Our standing in the community, our social connections. Your social connections? I laughed quietly. You mean the ones you cultivated using my husband's restaurants? The ones you claimed were through your family connections while treating his only son like kitchen help. Marcel appeared with Tommy's dinner, a perfect plate of everything he'd been forced to watch his cousins eat earlier. But this time, it was served on the finest china with proper silverware. The new menu Monsieur Tommy suggested last week, Marcel announced proudly, with his own modifications to the sauce. Quite brilliant, if I may say so. Patricia's head snapped up. What menu? What modifications? The ones he's been working on with me during his kitchen duties, Marcel smiled. The boy has quite a talent, like his father. Blake and Madison watched in shocked silence as their cousin, the one they tormented all evening, was served like royalty. This can't be happening, Margaret muttered, frantically texting someone, probably her lawyer. James wouldn't do this to his own family. His family? I stood slowly. You mean the family that made his son scrub pots while they ate? That forced him to clean up their deliberately made messes? That told him he'd never be more than a dishwasher? Tommy took a small bite of his food, then looked at Marcel with shining eyes. It's perfect, just like Dad used to make. Of course it is, Marcel beamed. You remembered his secret ingredient. Patricia's wineglass crashed to the floor as the full impact of what she'd lost hit her. Not just the restaurants, but the grandson who'd inherited his father's gift, the one she'd been too blind to see. The board of directors meets tomorrow, I continued calmly. I'm sure they'll be interested to hear about how the previous management treated the owner's son. And perhaps we should review the family discount policy. You wouldn't, Patricia gasped. This restaurant has been our social center for decades. Like the kitchen has been Tommy's prison. I picked up a piece of the expensive china they'd never let him use. Amazing how quickly things can change, isn't it? Margaret stood abruptly. Children, we're leaving. Rachel, you'll be hearing from our lawyers. I look forward to it, I smiled. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the security footage of how you've treated Tommy these past 6 months. Not to mention the financial records James kept about your personal expenses charged to the restaurant. The color drained from both women's faces. They'd never questioned where James had installed the security cameras, including the ones in the kitchen. Marcel, I called softly, please have security escort Ms. Margaret and her children out, and call the valet for Patricia. I believe her family parking privileges have just expired. Tommy watched in stunned silence as his cousins were led away, their usual smugness replaced by shocked disbelief. For the first time, they were the ones being shown to the service exit. You can't do this, Patricia tried one last time, her voice trembling. I'm his grandmother. Yes, I agreed, the grandmother who made him eat leftover scraps in the kitchen, who told him he'd never be more than a dishwasher. How does it feel, Patricia, knowing you've spent 6 months teaching the owner's son to clean toilets? Marcel returned with a thick folder. The security footage you requested, Madame Rachel, including last month's incident with the soup pot. Patricia flinched, remembering how she'd made Tommy clean a scalding pot without gloves because he'd been too slow with the dinner service. Mom, Tommy spoke up finally, his voice small but steady. Did Dad know? About how they treated us. Yes, sweetheart, I touched his shoulder. That's why he arranged all this. He wanted to make sure they could never hurt you again. But why didn't he stop them before? Because, Marcel answered gently, your father wanted them to show their true nature, so there would be no doubt when the time came for change. Patricia sank into her chair, her perfect posture finally breaking. The annual charity gala next week. All my friends will be very interested to learn who really owns their favorite restaurant, I finished, and how they've been treating him. Imagine their reaction when they discover their generous hostess made the owner's son wash their dirty plates. Tommy straightened in his chair, something of his father's strength showing in his face. I want to change the kitchen rules, Mom. No more making kids work there as punishment. Of course, I smiled. It's your restaurant now. And Grandma? He looked at Patricia, who seemed to have aged years in minutes. She can still come to dinner, but she has to use the regular plates, like everyone else. The simple dignity in my son's voice brought tears to my eyes. Even after everything, he showed more class than his grandmother ever had. You heard the owner, I told Patricia. Though perhaps you'd be more comfortable eating in the kitchen. I hear the cardboard boxes make excellent tables. Patricia gathered her designer purse with trembling hands, her world of social superiority crumbling around her. This isn't over. Actually, it is. I handed her one final document. Your personal account at the restaurant, it's been closed. I believe there's a lovely diner down the street that might be more appropriate for your new status. As she walked out on shaking legs, Tommy turned to Marcel. Can you teach me more about Dad's recipes? I want to learn everything. Of course, young master, Marcel beamed. Though this time, you'll be cooking in the chef's jacket your father left for you, not an apron meant for washing dishes. I watched my son finish his dinner, served on the same china his grandmother had claimed he'd never deserved to touch. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about taking power. It's about teaching those who abused it the true meaning of service. And tomorrow, when Tommy walked into his restaurant through the front door instead of the service entrance, he'd do it not as the unwanted grandson, but as the owner his father had always known he could be.